Good morning, everybody. So we are just having people join us. No doubt this will continue for some while as people possibly nip in from a 9 till 10 if you're unfortunate enough to have a 9 till 10 meeting. And people are welcome to join us throughout. So you are in the correct place. I hope you were expecting to be at the Evidence and Resources from 10 Years of the Ideal Programme webinar, because that is very much what this is. So welcome and thank you for joining us on this, what I presume is a cold morning where you are. It certainly is here in Aberystwyth. Well, I should introduce myself probably. I'm Dr Catherine Charlwood and I'm the Research Translation and Impact Manager for the Ideal Programme. What are we in for this morning? Well, to start off with, hopefully you've recognised that this is the welcome. And then momentarily ahead of schedule. We won't keep up to that, so don't worry. I'm going to hand over to Professor Linda Clare, who is the Chief Investigator of IDEAL, who's going to give you a really fantastic overview of all of the different things that the IDEAL programme has produced and has found out over its decade researching mild to moderate dementia in the community. Then we're going to hand over to a special guest. We have Fiona Carragher here, who is the Director of Research and Influencing with Alzheimer's Society. And then we are going to move to a little break because I know that 2 hours is a long time to stay on an online meeting. So it's 11 o'clock roughly. I'm going to encourage you to get up and move around, refresh your drinks, whatever it is you need to do, please do that. But just in case people are still staying in the room and we don't want to feel there's too much of a lull in proceedings, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play some trailers of our different resources into the room. So there will be sort of videos happening during the break, just for those of you who are still there, but don't worry, you don't have to stay and listen to them. It's just so that we kind of have a sense of continuity and we keep the energy up. After our break, we're going to hear from our marvellous VVIPs, the Always Group, who I know are going to be introduced as part of Linda's presentation, so I won't say any more just for now. Finally, I'm going to do a very brief overview of just some of the ways that you might want to use our resources and some of the ways that we already know they are being used, and then we'll open up for some audience Q&A. So you will get your chance to ask your questions, and please do. At that point, you're very welcome to type them in the chat or to come off mute and indeed ask them live. It's always nice to hear someone's voice that isn't mine. So with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing and I'm going to invite Linda to get her presentation ready.
So thank you very much for joining us today as we think about the IDEAL programme, what we've learned over 10 years and how we can take it forward as regards improving the experience of dementia and enhancing active life. So some of you listening today may have been directly involved in IDEAL. We work with 34 NHS organisations in England, Scotland and Wales, and clinical research network staff recruited participants and visited them at home to gather information for IDEAL. So if you're one of our 56 local PIs or 273 clinical research network researchers who supported IDEAL, thank you so much. We couldn't have done it without you. And it's great if you're here with us today to see what the information you collected has helped to do. And I would also like to express my sincere thanks to our funders. So I just need to fiddle with my screen here, that's better. The first stage of IDEAL was funded by ESRC and NIHR, and the second by Alzheimer's Society as a centre of excellence. And it's been a huge privilege to have funding for a large programme over such a long period and to be able to really look in depth at this issue of living well and what it means. And you'll know that when we started off, that we started thinking about this, of course, more than 10 years ago. And at that time, the dementia strategy, Living Well with Dementia, was fairly recent. And this prompted us to start thinking, well, what does this really mean, this living well idea, and how are we going to make it a reality? When I put this slide together, I didn't anticipate recent political developments, but I should acknowledge that the original funding was part of the commitment to social science research in dementia around the G8 summit held in London in 2013. And of course, we're really pleased to see that support for social science and healthcare research, and obviously social care research as well. So the ethos of ideal involvement of people with dementia and carers, the people whose experiences we're thinking about, has been integral. And we have been very fortunate to have our Always group, our PPIE group, as they started off, and they joined the study, and they decided to name themselves Action on Living Well Asking You, so abbreviated to Always. And we've worked with them now over 10 years. We've learned a huge amount about involvement. I think we've progressed our understanding from a sort of traditional approach to PPIE to really evolving into co-production and partnership working. And the kindness and care that the group have shown for each other and for us has really benefited the whole programme. And many of them have stayed with us throughout. Others have joined as we've gone along. And you'll be hearing from some of them later. So you can see them here, both in a very serious meeting, and also we've had lots of times of friendship and enjoyment as well together. And the Always group members were also represented on the programme advisory group, which brought together people from a range of backgrounds, and that was chaired by Dr. Norrie Graham, and that has been a tremendous support to us throughout the project. So I'd like to thank all of the advisory group members, and especially Norrie as well. So what did I mentioned already that we were thinking about living well, why we were thinking about living well. So what did we set out to do? Well, we really wanted to think broadly about living well and understand what meant that somebody was living well, or what does living well mean? What influences people's ability or capability to live well with the condition? And I will just say, I know that this living well is a term that people are sometimes not very comfortable with. So I just want to say we're using it here in a positive sense of enabling people to do as well as they can, or to flourish, or to make sure that they have as good a quality of life as possible while living with dementia. And, you know, at a very basic level, to give some hope that it is possible to have a good quality of life. We were interested in thinking about people very much in their context. So if they have, for example, a family member who's supporting them, how does that family member do, and how do the two of them influence each other? And also the role of services and support in enabling people to do as well as possible. And we particularly wanted to know what helps to maintain the capability for living well over time as dementia progresses. And can we identify what the signs might be that someone is at risk of declining in their ability to live well, so that perhaps if we could spot that early on, we might be able to think of ways to prevent that happening. We know that there's a lot of inequalities in health and health outcomes. We also see that in terms of people's ability to live well. We're interested in understanding the impact of different aspects of diversity and inequality in terms of how people are able to manage living with dementia and how well they're able to do. And we wanted to think about ways of measuring and monitoring living well. And very importantly, to translate all of that into practical resources. So what we heard from people with dementia over and over again is that when they get diagnosed, they may be given information, but what they're not often given is hope to live with the condition. And so we wanted to translate our findings into practical resources that could help to bring some hope, with three different aims. Firstly, to directly benefit people living with dementia and or their carers. Second, to help people who plan and provide services like commissioners and practitioners in their role. And third, to increase public awareness and understanding so that there's more inclusion and acceptance. And I will tell you about some of these practical resources, and Kathy will talk more later about how you can make use of them. We have used arts-based approaches as one key element, and I'll say more of those as we go through. But one example was this was our first arts-based project. It evolved into what became the Unfurlings, where groups of people living with dementia worked with artists. That was photographer Ian Beasley, poet Ian Macmillan, and the late cartoonist Tony Husband, to create a set of banners for hope and change, expressing what people wanted to convey to different audiences. Those were exhibited at the People's History Museum in Manchester in December 2019, and then they went on tour around the country, and they're also published in a book. And I think these express the voice of people with dementia and carers very well. I'm going to show some of them as I go through the talk, just to illustrate some of the points. So I'm going to start them with an overview of IDEAL, tell you a little bit more about the programme. If those of you less familiar with it, it's a 10-year social science research programme focused on living well and people with mild to moderate dementia in the community. It's become a 10-year programme. We were able to recruit a cohort of people with mild to moderate dementia living in the community and follow them over time. In total, that was over 1,700 people with dementia, and over 1,400 of those had a carer also participating. And we followed as many of them as possible over 6 waves of interviews. We gave them lots and lots of questionnaires, and they gave us lots of information. And we also had additional, more in-depth conversational interviews with a smaller number. And around that, as in the second phase of IDEAL in our Alzheimer's Society Centre of Excellence, we had some linked studies with groups that are typically underrepresented in research, people from Black and minority ethnic communities, people living with undiagnosed dementia, that was in collaboration with the CFAS Wales study, and people with more severe dementia. People usually say to me when they talk to me about IDEAL, they describe it as productive. They say IDEAL has been very productive. And we have published over 70 scientific papers, and I'm afraid there are more to come. You can find all of them on our website. Each one, Kathy will point you to that. Each one has an accessible summary. I'm not going to go through all of them today. You'll be relieved to hear. But I will give you some headlines about the main findings. And there is a lot to tell you, so it will be a quick ride through 10 years of research outputs. And some of the slides are quite detailed, but please don't worry about the detail. They're really there for illustrative purposes. And I think it will make sense in the context of what I'm going to say. But I also want to emphasize that IDEAL is very much a team effort, and what I'm going to present is very much on behalf of the team. So when I say we, that is really acknowledging that this has been that there are many people have contributed to the work, and we appreciate all of those contributions. So just to perhaps make that structure a bit clearer, these T1, it was our first time of data collection where we recruited the main cohort, and we followed them as many as possible 1 year later, and then another year later. Then there was a 2-year gap when our funding changed over. We became a Centre of Excellence, and then we had planned 3 more times where we'd follow people up. And at time 4, we also recruited additional people to do their time 1, as it were, to give us more numbers in some of the groups where we would naturally have fewer people. So people with more rare dementias, for example, and people with young onset dementia. Now, we were very badly hit by COVID, of course, and that did affect our data collection in this second phase. On the positive side, we were able to do some COVID-specific work, and the other impact was that we had to move our data collection online and work online or over the telephone with people, and so that did affect it. We learned a lot from that too, and we were very grateful for all those people with dementia and carers who adjusted to doing it that way. I think we've all learned a lot from that as well. So moving on, I'll just give you a few details about our cohort that we recruited. These are the participants living with dementia. There were slightly more men than women, which I think suggests that wives are very good at getting their husbands to take part in research, perhaps husbands a bit less so getting their wives to take part. In terms of age, the biggest group were aged over 80, which is as we would expect. And in terms of the diagnosis, we wanted to cover any type of dementia. We didn't restrict according to diagnosis, and we tried to get sufficient people with the less frequently diagnosed types of dementia to give us enough data to understand something about their experience. So just over half had Alzheimer's disease, and then we saw much smaller numbers in those other diagnostic groups. Moving on to the carers, here we have the opposite picture as regards sex, mostly female, and about 4 out of 5 were wives or husbands of the person with dementia. Most of the rest were grown-up children. And the age distribution here was a bit different because, of course, we had those grown-up children in the picture, so a slightly younger group overall. I guess, like most good research projects, we started by looking at the evidence that was already out there. And we were able to find quite a lot of evidence about quality of life, which is, of course, closely related to living well. And we did a big systematic review. It gave us less clear directions than we perhaps expected at the time. Essentially, it showed that, as you can see from the forest plot here, a great many things have small links with living well when you measure those two sets of things at the same time. But it didn't really give us an overall picture of what was or the relative importance, let's say, of all those things. And even more important, it gave us very, very little information about what makes a difference over time. So what might predict at one point that someone is going to do better or worse at the next time we see them. So although it told us that we reinforced that quality of life is important, but it didn't really give us any kind of overall picture as to what we should be doing. So our advisory group gave us some very wise advice, and they said they wanted us to start by focusing on the big picture and how things link together to shape whether someone is living well, rather than focusing on 1 or 2 particular things, and to try to think very broadly about it. And we did do that for both people with dementia and carers. I'm going to focus mostly on people with dementia now. I'll just touch on the carers a bit more briefly. What we had to do to start with was develop our framework for exploring living well. And that meant we had a lot of meetings and discussions about that, which were really interesting in the early days. And how would we measure living well? How would we operationalize that? We were very clear that we wanted to think broadly about living well, and not just to think about symptoms and how to manage symptoms or reduce symptoms. And we thought about frameworks like the World Health Organization framework, which focuses on functioning. So it talks about the importance of being able to engage in activities and participate in society, and about the range of things that affect that possibility, not just the health condition, people's physical state, but a lot of the person, who they are as a person, and the things they want to do and they're interested in, and their values, and also the broad context that they're in, both social context and their relationships, and also the environment that they live in. And all of those things affect inclusion and participation. And we also were influenced by the Institute of Medicine work on living well that drew out some of the key, they gave a great description of what living well might mean in terms of comfort, security, well-being, and so on. And we know that dementia poses challenges because symptoms make things harder, but we know too that there are a lot of other things that get in the way, and might be personal impact, anxiety, or loss of confidence. It might be reactions of others that are not very helpful or understanding, or it might be because environments aren't adapted very well and make it difficult to access things. And it might be because communities are not inclusive or not yet dementia friendly enough. So we thought about living well as a balance between these kinds of challenges and the resources that you have. And resources could be things like a positive outlook, a good network of friends, enough money to live on, being physically fit, and so on. So we mapped out how we were going to evaluate living well and what influences it. And we chose to look at how people viewed their quality of life, well-being, and satisfaction with life. using questionnaires. We also asked them, what does living well mean to you? Our Always group suggested these kinds of open-ended questions, very useful to include. And so we did do that. And it indeed was very useful. And we had, as I said, in-depth interviews with a smaller group of participants. And then we looked at the resources people had in several life domains: physical health, psychological health, social resources, their social situation, their living situation, and how they're able to manage their everyday life and the challenges of living with dementia. We looked at how the person with dementia and the carer, if there is one, influence each other, and we wanted to see how things change over time. So, as I said, the advice to look at the big picture was very good advice, but it was a bit of a headache for our statistical experts. However, they rose to the challenge and they gave us this, a model for how all those various things are linked together and to be linked to being able to live well with dementia when everything's measured at the same time. For those of us who are not statistical experts, it was very helpful to think about looking at this in a slightly different way. So in this graph, we can see the domains here, domains of life here that we looked at, and the bars show how strongly those domains are linked with how people rate their ability to live well. And in this case, the orange bars shows how strong that link is when we just look at each domain individually and how well it links to living well. And so you can see that all of them actually are strongly linked. So each of those domains of life is important for living well. And the blue bars show what happens in the next step when you put all of those domains together in the statistical model and let them fight it out as to which one is going to come out on top. And in that case, the blue bars, it was person's psychological characteristics and psychological health that come out as the crucial connection. So it doesn't mean that the other aspects are unimportant, but how we interpret that is that all of them are important because they affect psychological well-being, and psychological well-being in turn is very closely related to how well you think you are managing to do and how much you think you are living well. So they're all important, but there's a kind of way in which they channel into each other and link together. Then the other really important thing was to know what happens over time. And when we looked at the whole group together, and now we're seeing in grouping together people's scores, individual scores, over time, starting from the time they were diagnosed. So, we had a lot of people came into the study fairly soon after being diagnosed, and extending over a number of years following that time. What we can see is, we see straight away, this is quality of life questionnaire scores, and you see that people don't change very much. Men change a little bit more than women, but on average, you don't see much change. However, as we know, grouping people together and averaging scores can hide a lot of things. And in this case, it did hide a lot of individual variation. And so this was another challenge for our statistical experts, but they managed to delve into that more deeply. And again, psychological health turns out to be very important, because if we see at one time point that people's scores on measures of psychological health are giving some cause for concern or have dropped, that is a very strong sign that the next time we see that person, their quality of life will have dropped as well to quite a meaningful degree. So, for example, if someone is feeling depressed or is feeling low about themselves and not showing much sense of valuing themselves, or feeling that they're no longer the same person they were before, or saying they feel more lonely, those are all signs, again, that things are likely to change in terms of their ability to live well. So not only do we need to support psychological well-being in the first instance, but we need to be very clear that that's a key way to preventing a decline in being able to live well. And as we've seen, psychological well-being is really important and underpins the person being able to do well, also across all the other domains. So putting all of that together gave us the idea for the initial ideal, what's becoming, evolving into the ideal living well map. So, so these are our domains, and this is what was happening over time. There at this point, we also have a few other things that we might want to think about. We know that adjusting to the diagnosis is a process people go through. We know that relationships are important. We know that how the care is doing will have an influence. So our next step to fill this out properly was to then look in a bit more detail at each of the domains and these other important influences. And so I'm just going to give you some examples of the things within the domains that affect or are linked to being able to live well with dementia. So starting off with physical health, and many people in our cohort had additional health conditions alongside dementia. Here we've just plotted quality of life score against number of health conditions. And as the number of health conditions increases, quality of life is decreasing, is lower. So physical health, obviously very important for being able to live well. Another domain we looked at was the ability to manage everyday life, everyday activities, household tasks, shopping, getting involved in things you want to do, going out to meet other people. And here we see a similar thing. As the ability to do those everyday activities decreases, so too the scores on those measures of living well, well-being and satisfaction with life also decrease. And I'm just going to show you some of the managing everyday life was quite important for some of the arts-based projects in the banners that we made. And so I just wanted to share some of those with you. So this group, Face It Together in Bradford, wanted to raise awareness of the complexity of the technology that we encounter in everyday life, things like ATMs and ticket machines. And we've heard recently about ticket offices being threatened with closure and the impact that that could have on ability to travel. And so they wanted to raise awareness and campaign around this. And that was what their banner focused on. Another group, this group in Yorkshire, Yorkshire Deep, wanted to raise awareness of the need for public transport to be accessible and user-friendly so that people could get out and about and have what they called a grand day out. And they went a step further and held a public unfurling of their banner on York railway station, accompanied by a brass band, to really make a splash and make sure they were noticed and get that message out about the need to make these things accessible. And then, not unrelated, but moving on to psychological health, loneliness is something that, of course, we know is a big problem. And in our sample of people with dementia, about a third were lonely. That's quite similar, I think, to the general population of the same age. But what we saw was that who've got well-being scores, and again, the more lonely a person was, the lower that well-being score was likely to be. So, and of course, that relates to things like being able to get out and about and meet people and environments being friendly and so forth. And our Budding Friends gardening group at Age UK Exeter made their banner on this topic. They wanted to raise the importance of friendship and how groups like the Budding Friends make a difference, providing that lifeline of social contact for people where they feel accepted. And of course, groups like this struggle all the time to secure funds to keep going, but they really are important and a huge lifeline for the people with dementia and carers who get involved. Thinking about other influences on living well, one example was how people adjust to a diagnosis and develop their understanding, or as we call it more technically, representation of dementia, that shapes how they then cope and manage to live with the condition. And by looking at this, we were able to group people together based on the broad understanding they had of dementia and how they thought about it and talked about it, and then compare how each group was doing. And this was very interesting to us because we found that people who thought of dementia more or less as a part of getting older that was to be expected and just managed had better quality of life, well-being and satisfaction with life than people who thought about dementia in more medical terms, if you like, who thought about it as a disease and used medical words to talk about it, like Alzheimer's and disease. And this difference in scores on those living well measures stayed the same over time. So that group who were thinking of this more as it's sort of an expected stage of life did better. And this process of adjusting to the diagnosis was something that became the theme for another one of our arts-based projects, the Bridge. We worked with director Marion Brivdeer and composer Ed Wright, with Arts Council of Wales funding, to develop, perform and film a new one-act opera to promote understanding and reduce stigma. And it portrayed a couple where the husband developed and was diagnosed with dementia. And we were very moved by many of the comments that people in the audience made. It did seem to really hit a note with people that, and it was quite emotional and moving, and made people think about this in a way that perhaps transcended just words. And thinking about how each member of a couple will influence each other, where there is a couple, we looked at how carers' experiences were linked to living well for the person with dementia. And we know that, for example, where carers are more stressed, the person with dementia had lower well-being. That was something we were able to show. But we then wanted to go a step further and think about, it's not really one way. And carers give a lot to people with dementia. People with dementia also give a lot to carers, and then they can sometimes support each other in a very reciprocal way. We wanted to look at how they really influence each other in an equal sense, and we used a statistical method called actor-partner independence models to explore this. We know, so first of all, looking at each individual in that couple, depression, loneliness, isolation, and thinking the relationship's not going very well affects ability to live well for each of them, naturally enough. But when we look at how those features in one person affect the other, for the person with dementia, if that person is depressed or lonely, that affects the carer's ability to live well. But isolation and how the person with dementia sees the relationship don't. And for the carer, if the carer is depressed or feeling isolated, then that affects how the person with dementia is doing, but not the carer's loneliness or how they see the quality of the relationship. So it's very interesting to be able to tease that out. And again, think about how we're going to, if we are, perhaps if we're working with one member of that couple, how that might also be beneficial to the other person in that dyad. So building on that, again, encourage us to think about communication in these close relationships. We work with theatre director Paul Jepson and a group of actors, and the Always group advised them to produce The World Turned Upside Down, a very innovative documentary film that we made based on a play that we produced and performed 3 times, which took a number of the scenarios around transitions or tipping points in that progression of dementia and how those situations are navigated. The actors portrayed those scenes, and then the audience were invited to comment and suggest ways that might be done differently to give a better outcome. So it was, again, I think created new insights by doing that. And that led to the evolving the full ideal living well map. We now have that with all of our evidence together. The way it's set out here makes sense to me, but probably won't to anyone else. But we are working on a user-friendly version for professionals and practitioners that put all of this together and help to think about some of the ways that we might approach discussing these issues with people. And we are doing the same for carers. We have our big statistical model and our living well map with all the evidence summarized, and that's now going into another user-friendly resource. Carers are a diverse group. We need to think about them as individuals, the same as people with dementia. So having these maps will help to prompt that thinking. And as part of reinforcing the importance of support for carers, as our Oldham Springboard group showed here in their banner. And we were very fortunate to be able to contribute to a report for Alzheimer's Society focused on that topic as well. And of course, carers provide, family carers provide most support for people with dementia. The amount and costs of formal services is not high. This is the blue section here, but the orange section shows the equivalent of the support that carers provide. So that's also increasing more over time than the use of paid services. So very important that we support that. And our Kirk Lees Deep group wanted to remind us about how trying to navigate services can feel very confusing and frustrating and very much like a maze. And they wanted to emphasize that we need to simplify this. And also we looked at what services people had said they had received and found that there was evidence of inequalities. For example, older women with fewer educational qualifications were less likely to receive services and support than others. And that evidence was used in another Alzheimer's Society report. So I'm just going to very briefly comment on some of the angles around diversity and inequality. Diagnosis, which dementia diagnosis you have makes a difference. And in particular, we see that people with Parkinsonian dementias have have lower quality of life than people with say Alzheimer's disease. So we should not think about dementia as all one thing. It's misleading. We need to think about the specific needs of people with these different diagnoses. Social disadvantage, as deprivation of the area level deprivation increases, so quality of life scores decrease. Living alone, about 18% of our sample were living alone, and they had some advantages. They were better able to manage everyday activities, and they tended to use more assistive technology. They had a bit more social contact outside the house, but they were more prone to depression, more likely to feel lonely, and were experiencing lower quality of life, satisfaction with life and well-being. And that stayed similar over time. And of course, they were more likely to move into a care home at an earlier stage. Another group we looked at were people from Black and South Asian communities. And again, people with dementia had poorer quality of life and were more lonely than their white British peers, and carers were more stressed, felt more trapped in the role, and were less positive about the relationship. And that was, it was important to think about the context from interviews. People talked about not belonging, about discrimination, about experiences of racism. And then in the present, there were issues around cultural sensitivity of services and so on. So being from an ethnic minority community, you start at a different point, and then you also have a different experience in the moment. And this is something we're going to have to get better at sorting out in the coming years. And this South Asian group, Hamari Yardin, asked simply, when we talk, will you listen? And they were thinking in particular about losing skills in their second language, English, and the impact that would have on being able to access services and support. And focusing on diversity reminds us of the importance of a personalised understanding of each individual. And we've been working on creating resources to try to help with that. We work with a co-production group of people with dementia to co-produce and validate a questionnaire that captures the extent to which someone is living well across those various domains. We used the answers to that open-ended question I mentioned and refined them down, and went through a lot of testing, and we've ended up with a questionnaire that's the 10 items, that's accessible and easy to fill in, with a layout that was co-designed with people with dementia, but that gives a robust measure of living well, because we've looked at how it relates to other measures of similar kinds of constructs. We were able to provide evidence-based information and advice in the COVID pandemic, and that was translated. We did that very early on, and it was translated into 10 more languages by the Race Equality Foundation. And that evolved into the Living with Dementia Toolkit. This is one of our most important outputs. Kathy will say more about it later. It's an online resource, but there is a printed guide in English and Welsh. It, again, covers those same domains that we have in our Living Well map, but provides a lot of resources and information and ideas and suggestions. It's been widely accessed from over 130 countries, so far 23,000 users. It's included in a World Health Organization forum, and it's being used in various ways in this country, which Kathy will also say more about later. So this was a great collaboration between people living with dementia, carers and professionals, and those joint perspectives were really helpful in tackling some topics where, particularly, for example, the topic of risk, where carers and people with dementia tend to have rather different perspectives, and by working together it was possible to come to a resource that really made sense of those different perspectives and respected all of them whilst being useful for everyone. The toolkit also contains some standalone resources like My Life, My Goals, which is developed by people with dementia and enables them to think about making things in everyday life more manageable. And coming soon, My Life Today, co-produced again with people with dementia. We currently have 20 people with dementia testing it, so talking to them about their experience of using it and anyone who's supported them to use it. And so we're going to find out what changes we might make before we add it to the toolkit for everyone to use. I also want to mention, I don't know how many research projects have their own song, but we do. And this relates to hope, which has been an important theme in Ideal. This song was called Brave New World, was composed and performed by musicians living with dementia, was adopted as the official song at the Alzheimer's Disease International Conference last year. And in the words of the song, which are addressed to people with dementia, we all stand beside you and hope in your heart will see you through. Just one or two more things I'm going to mention before I stop. There are a few things still to come in Ideal. Our funding is staying open for 6 months for some work to be completed, some more scientific papers, one focusing on inequalities in particular, a systematic review about living well with more severe dementia, and the My Life Today resource. Also, after a 9-year battle with bureaucracy, we are linking our cohort data with routinely collected data on health service use, which will help us to understand more about the service needs and support needs. And we are currently working on a book which will be coming out in the Rethinking Dementia series with Open University Press. It's very much co-produced with our Always group and combines their reflections and will in essence be a manifesto for living well. Finally, I just want to say we've had a wonderful, it's been a great privilege to work on Ideal, and we are not done yet. We are not stopping there. It will leave a big gap for the team when Ideal finishes, but many of the team members, the ones highlighted here in blue, are forming a new team with other colleagues to become a policy research unit in dementia and neurodegeneration. So we'll be doing some really exciting research projects that we will be able to feed the results and recommendations directly back to the Department of Health and Social Care and to the NHS, and integrated care commissioning boards, and to make sure that they have the best possible chance of going into policy. So we hope you'll stay with us and follow us on that journey as well. And I'm just going to end there. It remains for me to say thank you for listening. It has been the most tremendous privilege to lead Ideal. Thank you so much for your interest. And I'm going to hand back to Kathy now to take us onto the next stage in this webinar.
Thank you so much, Linda. I mean, yes, it's very rare, as I'm sure most of you are aware, for research programmes to have 10 years of funding, and thus the challenge of trying to cover quite everything that Ideal has done is a large one, but admirable job there, and I'm sure that we're all applauding silently in our own little Zoom hats. I'm going to pass over now to Fiona Carragher, Director of Research and Influencing at Alzheimer's Society, to share a fundraising perspective from the people who funded part of Ideal. So thank you very much. Over to you, Fiona.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Linda. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this morning. For those of you that don't know Alzheimer's Society, we have been a charity for over 40 years, and our vision is to end the devastation caused by dementia. We do that in two main ways: providing help now, support, advice, information from the moment that you're worried about your memory, navigating those most difficult and challenging times from diagnosis right through to end of life. And we seek to reduce those crisis moments that Linda talked about. You know, many still are inevitably facing avoidable admission into hospital, having to find an alternative home, such as a care home, in crisis, and all of that is unacceptable. We also provide hope for the future, and I have the absolute privilege to lead that programme of work at Alzheimer's Society, where we're a force for change so that people who experience dementia are having transformed experiences both now and in the future. And we do that through two main ways: through our research and innovation, where we fund world-class research programmes like Ideal, and leaders like people like Linda and leaders of the future and other members of the team, but also through our policy and influencing work, where we set out what good looks like. We support the health and care system to understand this, and then we hold governments to account in terms of delivery. And everything we do at Alzheimer Society is underpinned by the lived experience of people affected by dementia, which is why it is an absolute pleasure and privilege to be here today, because you can see that writ large through the IDEAL programme, and you're going to hear from the Always group later, which I think is an absolute exemplar of this. Now, as a research funder, going back to kind of 2018, 2017, so before I led the programme, we decided that we would invest in substantial long-term programmes focused on the key challenges that people affected by dementia faced. And the reason we knew what those things that were most important is that every single part of our research funding is done in partnership with people affected by dementia through our wonderful research network of volunteers. And I know that there are many of our research network on the call today, because what our research network does is hold a mirror up to us as a research funder to ensure that we're focusing on the right things. So in 2018, we decided to do these big, long-running programmes focused on areas where there were very, very little evidence. We focused on post-diagnostic support in primary care with a centre led by Dane Professor Louise Robinson in Newcastle, the PREDEM project. We established a centre in London led by Professor Claudia Cooper, the NIDEM project, which was looking at the relationship between the individual with dementia and their carer. And then the IDEAL programme that you've heard about today from Linda, which is all about the psychosocial elements of living well. And as Linda said, we thought there was kind of intuitive evidence there, but when the systematic review was done, actually there was very little substantive evidence that could really demonstrate what the elements of the quality of life were and what the interventions were needed. Before I talk about IDEAL and how that work has been really important to us at Alzheimer Society, and actually most importantly to our beneficiaries, those affected by dementia, I wanted to reflect on the impact of this Centre of Excellence model, this very long-term funding. And I think there is a number of things that IDEAL has shown us to be an exemplar of this. That long-term funding provides that stability, and it also provides that ability to tackle huge questions on a much bigger scale than we would be able to do with individual projects. What we've seen, not only in IDEAL, but in all of our centres, is that it's enabled collaborations and really deep relationships between different academic teams to be built. And we've also seen a cadre of research leaders emerge for the future. Linda, Claudia and Louise are now all involved, either leading or key components of the new NIHR policy research units. So again, supporting and enabling our research leaders for the future has been a really important element to our long-term funding. But really importantly to us, what we've seen in these long-term funding programmes is that it has put meaningful co-production at the heart of the programme, building those deep relationships, really building the trust and enabling those affected by dementia to really be at the heart of the research programme. And I'm so excited for you all to hear from the Always team later on how important that was. So at Alzheimer Society, we've taken on the learning from what we did from those 3 original centres, and we have announced in 2023 a new centre which will be focused on implementation of blood tests for Alzheimer's disease. So really looking to disrupt over 5 years and build the evidence for a new diagnostic paradigm. Then we will announce in January who the academic centres will be, but they will be working in partnership with local NHS and integrated care systems. And also next year in 2024, we'll announce a call out for our next focused area, which will be on health inequalities. And as Linda has already said, there are significant gaps in our understanding and knowledge about what are the real drivers for poor outcomes and poor quality of life from different communities. So just before the break, I wanted to talk to you about the importance of IDEAL's research in helping us improve the lives of people affected by dementia. Now, in some ways, I've not got to kind of state this to so many people on this call, but we have approximately 900,000 people living with dementia across the UK, and that number is set to increase in years to come. And despite this increased prevalence, so many of us will be affected by this on this call, we know that far too often people's needs are going unmet. And that might be because there's a lack of relevant information, there's limited access to high quality care and support, or giving that support to the emotional and mental health needs that, as Linda's already said, is kind of the pivotal piece to kind of enable people to live well. The result of these needs being unmet is the quality of life of those affected by dementia being negatively affected. And that's why research into skilled dementia care and psychosocial interventions is just so important. It provides us with an opportunity to identify the challenges people are facing, and also, because of this long-term funding, providing the space to address challenges and develop solutions. Now, only by understanding these key areas is how we can actually start to deliver and develop high quality evidence-based care for the future. So I hope you didn't lose too much, but I was going to say that we've got, we know that there are drugs coming through, donanemab and lecanemab are coming through NICE over the coming months. But despite that, we are still a long way off for having cure for dementia. So really understanding what good care looks like, particularly thinking about in terms of policy and support, is incredibly important. And that's what IDEAL is starting to help us build. So there are a number of ways in which IDEAL has helped us. Linda's mentioned some of this. The IDEAL findings have fed into the Fog of Support policy report, which was an inquiry we led, really trying to understand what good care looks like for the carer. So thinking about respite care, thinking about carer assessments, because that's kind of one of the pivotal relationships to enable someone with dementia to have a good quality of life. We know that about 40% of family carers will have clinically significant depression and anxiety. And as the IDEAL findings have illustrated, that carers' psychological health is one of the greatest predictions of breakdown in care. And we see this day in, day out at Alzheimer Society. It's often the carer on the phone, burnt out, on their knees, not sure what to do, that's actually leading to a crisis. Often people having to find an alternative home in crisis. But one of the other elements that IDEAL has helped us with is to start to think about good post-diagnostic support. And Linda mentioned our Left to Cope Alone report, which I'm sure, Catherine, we can share links to all of these reports with colleagues on the call. But what that highlighted, that people living with dementia needed comprehensive support that encompasses both that medical interventions, but also emotional and social well-being. And what we know, really depressingly, is that across the country, these needs are not being met in a consistent and timely way. And we know that this failure is having a direct and negative impact on the health and quality of life of those with dementia, but also a significant impact on the health and care system at large. The lack of consistent support means that people are at greater risk of having an admission into hospital, having a crisis. 1 in 4 people in hospital currently have dementia, and many of them are there avoidably because there's been a breakdown in the support and care that they need. The IDEAL work has also helped us in starting to understand some of the comorbidity interactions that people with dementia face. For a person with dementia, having a comorbidity really does impact their quality of life, as well as the relationship between their cognitive impairment and their capability to live well. The IDEAL programme has really helped us produce a robust evidence-based Alzheimer Society, as we've worked into the government as part of their major conditions strategy. Now, the government currently is not working on a standalone dementia strategy. What it's doing is looking at major conditions, 6 of the major issues that people across the country are facing. And dementia is now being considered alongside of the 5 other conditions, such as cancer and cardiovascular disease. So beginning to understand the interaction between these comorbidities with evidence coming out from IDEAL has been incredibly important. But the Ideal work has also enabled Alzheimer Society to collaborate with other charities. Linda talked about the importance of physical activity and how still being able to keep fit and take part in the activities that you love are an important part of quality of life. Alzheimer Society, using this work, has worked with both Sport England and lots of other charities in the Richmond group to collaborate on a big campaign called We Are Undefeatable, which supports and enables people living with long-term conditions to continue to do the things that they love, but also the things that we know keep them physically active and improve their quality of life. Now, in the last couple of minutes before we go to a break, I would highly recommend colleagues on the call to really look at the resources that the Ideal programme has produced, all of which have been brilliantly co-produced with people affected by dementia. They've been incredibly valuable to Alzheimer Society, not only as we develop our services and support, so our help agenda, but also to partners as they start to raise awareness of the challenges people affected by dementia face. So the Living with Dementia Toolkit, the documentary film World Upside Down, and the My Life questionnaire have all been incredibly important resources that I would encourage so many of you on the call to look at. So just in my final remarks, there's absolutely no doubt as a funder, we're really proud of the work that the Ideal team led by Linda has done. The achievements have made a real difference to people affected by dementia, raising awareness, improving our understanding of the factors that enable someone to have a good quality of life, but also thinking about those resources that can help professionals and practitioners to really make that difference. From a funder perspective, the Ideal programme's been an exemplar, sustained focus, fantastic leadership from Linda and her team on critical areas of dementia care, and all of which that's been underpinned by meaningful long-term co-production with the Always Group. And we need much more of this in the dementia research space. So finally, from me, from Alzheimer Society, huge thank you to Linda, to Catherine, to the team. Huge thank you to everybody being involved with this. There's more to come, and we look forward to collaborating even further with the Ideal team. Thank you, Catherine. And sorry I dropped out.
No, you came back very quickly. It's all fine. The technical gremlins had to be there, but we've bested them. Thank you so much, Fiona. It's wonderful to hear, and I'm so delighted that so many members of our Always Group and our research team are here to hear you say that, because of course, you know, it's too often the relationship between the funder and the people who are carrying out the research project, we don't necessarily get to hear directly from you. So it's lovely to hear that in your own words. Fabulous. Well, at this 11 o'clock moment, I'm going to invite everybody to have a stretch, to have a wander around, to refresh that brew, or indeed tap the Nespresso machine, depending on what's available to you where you are. And we will restart at 10 past with the undefeatable in their own way, Always Group. Okay, so feel free to leave your camera on or turn it off. If you just stay in the Zoom room, we'll kick off again at 10 past, and I'm going to play some little introductory trailer videos into the room just to keep it feeling like things are grooving. All right, see you shortly.
Everybody who's affected by dementia is different.
And everyone is affected by dementia differently.
That's why everyone has a unique definition of what it looks like to live your life with dementia.
We created the Living with Dementia Toolkit to help people affected by dementia. You can choose which parts interest you and explore the toolkit at your own pace.
It's designed to give you hope for the future, inspire you with real life experiences, and offer ideas to help you live your life as you choose.
The toolkit is full of evidence-based resources created by researchers in co-production with people who've been directly affected by dementia, meaning they understand what you are going through.
The Living with Dementia Toolkit is divided into 5 sections. Each section reflects an aspect of life that our research and people affected by dementia have told us matters.
Stay safe and well. Stay connected. Keep a sense of purpose. Stay active. Stay positive.
Each section is introduced by both someone with experience of dementia and a researcher, and contains a range of resources for you to read, watch, or fill out.
There are tips on maintaining your everyday independence, advice on fun ways to stay active, positive stories to keep you uplifted, and much more.
Throughout the site, you'll find a combination of resources we've created alongside links to external sites and resources to help and inspire you.
You can explore the resources in any order, depending on what you feel is the most relevant for you. You can also print out resources to read at home.
It is possible to live your life with dementia with hope, and we want to show you how. Explore our resources today to find out more.
It meant a trip to the doctor. And from the doctor to a psychologist and then to a specialist.
Did you know that she was doing all of that?
Long story short, please let me get there. I've had a diagnosis of dementia.
So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at a set of scenarios, and each of these scenarios can be taken in various different ways. And we'll show you one way, we'll have a bit of a chat about it, and then we'll see if there's some other outcomes that can happen from those scenes.
OK, fine. Come on, please, let's just go now. OK, right, now where's the mobile?
I had it last night to set the alarm.
Well, what have you done with it, Mum?
It might have slipped under the quilt.
It's under the pillow.
Oh, right.
Mum, it's not charged. Where's the charger, Mum?
Is it still plugged in?
No, it's not. Oh, for God's sake, Mum, what have you done with it?
I don't remember.
The thing is, it's a small word, care, for a big, big thing. And caring is very, very, very hard. Because what you have to do if you're trying to care for somebody is you have to not allow your own emotions to condition your response. And we have to own up to the fact that actually we all do it all the time.
It captures for me all of the full picture of dementia, the good and the bad and the ugly. And the good is as important as the bad and the ugly.
I really found that so interesting and the exercise of trying to improve the relationships and the conversation in the moment. But it strikes me that one of the hardest, most daunting things about dementia is that there's a sense in families from that early diagnosis and memory problem stage that you need to have conversations in advance and about decisions that are so complicated and hard. And I think I certainly felt, and we all feel, really ill-equipped to have those conversations for a time point which is, you know, we don't know how far into the future.
So just a bit of a taster there of some of the resources that we have available for you. Okay, so welcome back from the break. I hope that you have a nice warm cup of something available to you. And I'm going to hand over to the incredible Rachael Litherland and the Always group. Over to you, Rachael.
Thank you, Kathy. Somebody's going to have to let me know if I completely freeze in this discussion. But I'm Rachael from Innovations in Dementia, and I've had the joy to facilitate, be part of the Always group for the last 7 years of the Ideal programme. So I'll let the group let them introduce themselves to you. We haven't got completely all members here today, but I hope I'm spotting everyone. So let's start off with Keith.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Keith Oliver, and I'm a member of the Always group and have been since its formation in 2014.
Thank you, Keith. David.
David Scott, living in Cheshire, likewise with Keith. I was there at the beginning. It's been such a privilege to work with the colleagues on the Always group, as well as all the other people we met along the way.
Thank you, David. Monica.
Good morning, I'm Monica. I live Surrey, Hampshire border. And I've also been, like David and Keith, with the Always group since 2014, and it's a pleasure to be here today.
Thanks, Monica. Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jackie. I live in Stockport, which is near Manchester, and I've really enjoyed my time with the Always group.
Thank you, Jackie. Julia.
Hello, I'm Julia. I'm an old timer. I've been in it since the beginning. And it's been a very, very interesting experience. I've loved it. And to be in something longitudinal is a complete privilege. You see such a marvellous picture of what's going on.
Thank you, Julia. Jane?
Hi, yeah, I'm Jane Ward, also in Hampshire. And I've been with the group practically from the beginning. I think I missed the first meeting. But yeah, since about 2014.
Thank you, Jane. And looking very Christmassy, Chris.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Chris Norris. I live in Ashford in Kent, not far from Keith, actually. I'm a Johnny come lately. I participated in all the surveys and everything, right through Ideal 1 and Ideal 2. But then during COVID, I was invited to join the Always group, which I was very honoured to be invited to join. And it's just been great. It's been a roller coaster of enjoyment. So smashing. Great to see everybody here today.
Thanks, everybody. So we're going to have a discussion between ourselves. Variously, you might want to show me your cards if you want to speak, or pop your hand up or wave at me. I'm trying to see you amidst other people on the screen. And we're going to give some reflections about why Ideal has been so important and what you hope the legacy might be for people who might be picking up the learning from our audience today. Before we start, does anybody want to describe the Always group? Anybody remember what Always even stands for?
Come on, Julia.
Yeah.
I am looking at Julia.
Yeah,
to be
we always look at Julia.
You are, and I'm trying to remember. It's, what is it? Action on living well. Asking you. I've forgotten something.
No, that's perfect. So action on living well, asking you. And you know, you've all been part of Always for different amounts of time, but what do you feel that the purpose of that group has been for the Ideal Research Programme? David and Julia.
Well, we've brought such a variety. I mean, it's the most amazing variety of experiences. I'm a carer and have had 3 different caring kinds of experiences. But to work with people who've actually living with dementia, and to interact within our group has been great, because we've learned so much from each other, and because of the confidence that we've developed between ourselves, we've been so open about it. But I think the great thing then has been, particularly for me in these latter stages, is the arrival of that Catherine Charlwood. I mean, she at times it appeared, and she, I think, was aware of it, but it didn't stop her, was the feeling that she was driving us along. But the co-production and the access that she had to the technical people, the graphic artists, and the graphics are great, seeing some of those over again. The interaction with people on the arts side, which has provided such useful visual material, which I think will be very important for people coming into the Ideal Resource Bank. And of course, delightful Rachael, who has managed everything so well.
Thank you, David. I'm going to come to Keith, and then we'll move on to our questions.
Yeah, I think that to amplify what David has said, the longevity of the group says a lot. You know, the fact that so many members have stayed within this group right from day one, and that's quite rare, I think, in this co-production world that we occupy. And you know, the name Always is true, because we're always asked, we're always consulted, we're always involved, we're always part of the project. And that's really, really important. We're not a tag on, we're not on sitting on the sidelines waiting to be involved. We are involved right at the center of the project. And that again is a little bit rare, really. And it's a good case study for other researchers to examine and maybe take things from.
Thanks, Keith. And I think Fiona was talking about the co-production at the heart of the Ideal Programme. And I think quite quickly the group, who maybe were set up as what's known as a patient and public involvement group, you know, quite an important aspect of research to make sure that people who are living with conditions or caring for people with conditions can really shape the research. We moved really quickly into co-production, into being equal partners, into the researchers entering the world of the Always group as well as the other way around. So if you want to hear a bit more from the Always group, there's a film which Kathy might put the link to on the Ideal website. Thank you, Kathy. So team, what do you think people who are working with people with dementia need to know about findings, thinking, learning from the Ideal Programme? We've got a very wide audience here today, and hope that they might take things into their worlds. What from your memories of the Ideal Programme is it really important that they do? Julia?
Well, listening to Linda show us the findings all together, it made me realize that the most important thing I think that people can learn from it, special people in the world of working with people with dementia, is to look at the person and the carer and the situation, and not just once, because what's been shown from the Ideal Project is what happens or what can happen over time. So I know that everyone's busy and very busy, but I actually think that it shouldn't be, as the Ideal Project was not a one-shot. Anybody working with anyone with dementia and in their situation, including their carer, needs it not to be a one-shot. They need to focus on that wider picture, and the psychological, emotional element. So you've got to be spotting how everyone's feeling. And also another thing I would say is that not everyone always answers the truth when they're actually with a health professional, and there has to be an awareness and reading between the lines.
Thank you, Julia. Jane?
Yeah, Julia's more or less said what I was going to say. I think it is something we talked a lot when we were doing the toolkit, was the fact that, you know, we are not just individuals living alone. The carer and the person with dementia, the interaction between us is so important. We really do kind of bounce off each other a lot. I know I couldn't have survived without my mum looking after me as much as I looked after her. And I think that comes across quite a lot in some of the things we've talked about. But the other thing I would think about is we talk a lot about hope. And that was a big thing. It's in our strapline. And I had a conversation recently where we were talking about the fact that when you get a diagnosis, you get bad news. You know, that we talk about the things you can't do now. And we need to have help about looking at what we can still do. Give us hope for the future. And we don't tend to think about the future. We reflect, we do reminiscence. We talk about what's going on right now, but we don't tend to talk about what's coming, because I think we always think it's going to be bad, but actually it doesn't have to be. If we can look forward with hope and think about what we can do, you know, the adventures we can go on, because you still can, maybe not as much as you used to, and not everyone's going to have the same opportunities, but we need to start thinking about it and have people actually feeling that they can look forward.
Thank you, Jane. Keith?
The thing I would say to researchers really very strongly is around appropriate communication, both within the meetings and in between the meetings, to keep the people who are supporting you, either as family carers or people with a diagnosis, fully involved. It's no good leaving it 6 months apart and then thinking, well, we'll send them an email to say we're going to meet next week. That doesn't work. There has to be a build-up of relationship. There has to be a build-up of trust and respect. And that is mutual and is absolutely totally within the DNA of this project. Can't advocate more strongly for it than that. And crucially, I think that's the real key message I'd want people to take away from today.
Thank you, Keith. David?
I think I want to go to a larger scale, really, because I've just been reading some of the preliminary material of the book that we're preparing, and looking again at what's come out on the information about the psychiatric and psychological aspects of this and how significant they have come out in the research. This should be a driving force for our mental health services, because really mental health services at the present time have fairly poor relations anyway. But this highlights the fact, bearing in mind the number of people who are coming into the system with dementia in the future, that there's a great need to rethink some aspects of mental health and certainly give it a much larger chunk of the resource base within the health service.
Thank you, David. And did I see your hand, Monica? Yeah.
Yes. Having been on the project for the 9 years, I think the main thing comes to mind is communication. Originally, well, mainly there's been 8 of us throughout COVID, and we've exchanged ideas and discussed things. We've listened to the people who are experiencing dementia. They're listening to carers or ex-carers about the situation. And this is why it's such an ideal project, is because we have been listened to. And I think for the wider community, health services and that is so important to listen to the people, both the carers and the person with dementia. So often, if one's not careful, a carer can talk for the person with dementia, or the person with dementia is speaking. It's so important that each person has their own time and space to talk to these professional people so that they can understand really what is going on and how they might be able to support and help them. And I think this is, you know, for 9 years, we've been able to collaborate and go through, and we've all changed in different ways. Some of us are getting slightly grayer or more furrowed, but we've all communicated, and I was speaking for myself, Catherine, and and it's but you know, we still communicate. It didn't matter what our experiences were. Each person was still able to communicate and discuss and listen to each other. And I think, to me, that is so important. And it has come out in the productions that have been made, and hopefully in the book next year.
Thank you, Monica. And David again?
Well, it's just an irony, really, in a way, that Zoom has played a very big part. Because on that basis, we could meet kind of every fortnight. We wouldn't have been doing that if we'd had to travel to London or Exeter or wherever, which was happening in the early stages. But we could keep that continuity of ideas going, and the feeling of things that we wanted to get sorted out, we could get sorted out fairly quickly. And Catherine was brilliant at getting them sorted out between the meetings. So,
well, we're going to come on to the Living with Dementia Toolkit and some of the practical things that we've worked on. But I've got one question. Chris, you come in, and then I've got one more question just around this section up.
Yes, I'd just like to sum it all up that in the 11 years since my diagnosis, I've not come across anything that can touch Ideal for their co-production and their listening ear, and they're involving everybody and making you feel so really totally smack in the middle of it all, not round the edges as Keith outlined, but right smack in the middle. And although you might have an opinion, we shared our opinions, and sometimes maybe people's opinions differed, but we honoured each other's opinions and took it on board. And the other big word was respect. I think there's actually an organisation called Respect as well. I'm not sure, but that's what I found. And as I say, when I was on whenever anybody came round to see me before COVID, and I was doing the Ideal 1 and Ideal 2, they were so friendly and so relaxing. Straight away, you felt comfortable and you felt able to talk about things that perhaps you would find more difficult to talk to somebody who was a bit more stiff professional-wise. But they were just so accommodating, and so the whole thing has just given me a huge glow going forwards, and it will do well into the future, particularly with the resources that we managed to produce during the COVID. You know, Living Well with Dementia, My Life, My Goals, and all the other ones. So I can't praise it enough.
So could I summarise what you've all been saying by suggesting that people working in practice with people with dementia could, and I'm sure they do, apply some of these approaches that you're saying are really strong from what you've experienced in Ideal? So I've written down trust, hope, respect, safe spaces, listening. They're all the concepts that make for a better life with dementia, I'm wondering. And just before I move on to your chance to tell the audience about the resources, or give your perspective on the resources, I was hearing what you were saying about this is a group of people with dementia and carers. We did move online during COVID, and prior to that we did meet face to face, and that did mean, sadly, that some of our members were no longer able to continue coming for various reasons. A few members died, so we've had a lot of change over 9 years. We've had new faces join, but also that difference perhaps between perspectives of people with dementia and perspectives of carers, but somehow we've managed to connect those two together and ended up having very deep discussions about some quite tricky issues. And that came out when we did the work on the Living with Dementia Toolkit, and I just wondered if anybody wanted to have a go at explaining that, about how that worked in practice. I'm looking at Jane, because you're in the middle of my screen, Jane, and you've got quite a nice story around risk. It was the risk one, wasn't it? It was the risk one which we couldn't solve. We just couldn't people's perspectives were very different, and although we were very respectful to each other and had some great discussions and deep discussions, we couldn't be in the other person's shoes on their tissue. So Jane, just see if you can explain it.
Well, I suppose for me, my mother was she's still my hero. She was very positive through her dementia. And one of the things she did quite early on was, because as soon as I had to start looking after her, I wasn't able to have children, so I've not been through the parenting thing, and I suddenly became her parent. And she used to say, "I'm the mum," and very forcefully, because she was letting me know that, you know, I shouldn't take that position. And she did actually threaten to sack me as a carer if I continued to wrap her in cotton wool and not let her do things. And she taught me very, very early on we were going to go off and we were going to have some fun. Which we did. And I mean, we had our bad days, don't get me wrong, we did have some really bad days, but most of the time my memories of the time looking after her were fairly positive. She used to like to sort of play me up, embarrass me as much as she could, but she really had fun. And I think it gave me a different outlook to a lot of people about how we're gonna go with caring, and we will have adventures, and I try as much as I can now with what I'm doing to create opportunities. But when we were talking to the rest of the guys, and they're here in a minute, I'll let Keith talk, but it was really interesting, as Rachel said, our different perspectives about risk. We want to protect, we're really worried about all the what if this happens, what if that happens, and we feel so responsible. And I suppose we spend a lot of time feeling guilt. We feel really anything that goes wrong is our fault. And so we do tend to want to sort of wrap in cotton wool and stop all those what ifs. And I remember Jackie talking about, you know, when she'd gone out, and I think she was talking about her mobility scooter and the battery being on red, amber and green. And I think there was whether or not to go down the hill to shop. But because the battery on her scooter was on amber, she thought maybe that was too much of a risk. And I think she made a comparison with her ability on a certain day, whether she was at red, amber and green, and that's really stuck with me. And maybe that trust between a carer saying, I'll let go of my fears, we'll take some risk, but you know, if you can just let me know, because if you know if you're on green, amber and red, I don't. And that's my concern, is I don't know how you're feeling, but if we can be really honest, that we will let go if you will be, you know, if you can tell us how you feel. And I just think that was really powerful. It was such an interesting session, probably one of my sort of standout sessions.
Yeah, thank you, Jane.
No worries.
Keith and Julia, and then I've got a final quick question, if I'm allowed, Kathy.
Yeah, on the point of the resources, Rachel and the audience today, one thing that's been, again, central to the project has been its desire to see the research being implemented, to see the research making a difference to the lives of those who are living with dementia, either with a diagnosis or a family carer. And it comes down to this so what question. So what difference is it going to make, all this data, all this research that's being accumulated over the past 9 years? And part of the so what and difference it's making are the resources, some of which Kathy has shared with us this morning on this webinar. And there's more as well, sitting waiting for you within the IDEAL website. And I think also what the project does, which is again quite unique, it thinks outside the box. So many of the aspects of the project are incredibly unique and have evolved as the project has evolved, such as the opera, the play, the banners, lots more that are sitting there, as I said, waiting for people to explore and discover. Because if you do the same, you get the same. And this project has tried to kick that idea into touch and say, well, let's do things a bit differently. Let's examine what living well actually means to people who are affected by this wretched embuggerance, as Terry Pratchett termed it. And it is wretched. There's no getting away from that. Life is very, very difficult for those of us who live with dementia. But what IDEAL does, it gives us a ray of hope. And it gives us a ray of hope because it provides evidence. And for so long, I've spoken to researchers and I've spoken to commissioners and I've talked to them about really good projects that are psychosocially based and are great to do. And they say to me, well, that's really nice to hear, Keith. Isn't that good fun? I hope you enjoyed it. And my response was, yes, I did. And do you know, it makes a difference to my health. It makes just the same difference to my health as the galantamine and the memantine that I take every day. In fact, I feel it makes a better difference. Those drugs help me in a way to access those great things that I do in my life. Ideal provides that for so many people, not just for me, not just for the Always Group, but for everybody who can access them. I commend it greatly to you.
Wonderful, Keith. Thank you so much. Julia.
I think Keith has said it all. I think he has said it all. And I think the way he said it, I think exemplifies the fact of how in our group within Ideal, we've really thought things through. And I actually think that experience personally for us of people who are carers or ex-carers with people who have a diagnosis, but not being in the same family is very, very, very valuable. And I'm going to just throw it out there to anybody who is listening who is working in the field with people with dementia and their carers, that if they could possibly do something a bit like that, or be welcoming enough for somebody to honestly say what would improve their condition, or what would improve not their situation in life, and that would be great. But it's just, yeah.
Thank you, Julia. So we're running very low on time, but I just wondered if each of you, you don't have to, but if anybody wants to say kind of one of the takeaways, either for the audience today or for something that they should go and have a look at in the Ideal programme that you really highly recommend. Can I go round you? Will that work? Can I look at Chris?
Yeah, I've got to say the toolkit. I've not come across anything that comes anywhere near the toolkit. There's lots of documentation out there, and getting words off paper is very hard. The toolkit is alive. It lives. It's got people in it who you can relate to. You've got people who are living with dementia. You've got the people who are caring for people with dementia. But whatever problem you come across, you can go in there. And it's there, and the thing is just growing and growing and growing. Every time I go in there, I think, oh, I haven't seen that one before, and I've been part of a lot of the videos. And it's just brilliant what's been put together, not only by us, but by Catherine. She's pulled everything together, and Rachel. They've pulled it together and put it in such a way that it just is addictive. You sit down with one cup of coffee and you go off then and make a great big jug of coffee because you don't want to miss anything. And it's a bit like those people sit down and watch a whole series, don't they, off Netflix or whatever. And that's what the toolkit is like. You go in there and it pulls you in, and there's just so much. It's alive and it brings you hope and happiness. There's nothing distressing or in it to bring you down. It's all full of hope and positivity.
Thank you.
So that was a bit more than a couple of words, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, the toolkit is highly commended by Chris. So I am 2 words, David. Couple of words.
Well, I can't confess to being addictive, but I do think the humanization in the visual material, the film and the opera and so on, is something that some people can relate to in a way which they can't with words. So those are the things I particularly recommend.
Thank you, David. Jackie?
I would recommend My Life, My Goals.
Thank you, Jackie. I've lost everybody on my screen. Keith?
Everything.
Monica?
I was going to say, it reminds me very much like a seed you put in the ground in the spring, and it blossoms into a wonderful, beautiful plant, flower. And it's just grown and grown, and we've each grown in each other's company and experiences and ideas. And I just think it's there in the toolkit with Ideal and Always, and it's just blossomed just like the wonderful plant, and hopefully people will find it useful. And it's been a privilege to be part of it.
Thank you, Monica. That's a lovely image. Julia?
Well, I know I was involved in the early stages of the play, which is now a film. But again, that is a marvellous resource because it comes out of research from the project, what the actual people said about it, there's an emotional reaction which could be seen in the audience, which is also in the film, and everybody who watched it rethought. Even though those of us had been carers, we saw how we could have been better carers. So that's a really good, well, it's all brilliant, but I want to put my hand up for that.
Thank you. And finally, Jane.
I think I'll go with Keith. Just look at all of it. I mean, we're all different, so we're all going to find different things that really appeal to us. Although the risk bit is really interesting, particularly for carers. I think I would sort of recommend having a look at that. But yeah, hopefully there's something for everyone in there. I'm just so proud, and thanks for letting us be a part of it.
Thank you, Jane. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure to have worked with you all these years and to be here with you today, and I'm sure we'll continue in some incarnation in the future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Just you all. It's always difficult to speak after the Always group, partly because they are so very eloquent and in large part because they make me quite emotional. So I shall pull myself together, and I'm just very quickly going to show you a few ways into some of the resources that they've just been talking about, and then I promise we will come to your questions because I'd far rather do those. So this is entirely non-exhaustive. This is just a few ideas to get you thinking with just a few of the resources, and we love it when people get in touch to tell us how they're using our resources, and it's something we have never heard of and would never have thought of, because obviously everybody's situation is different, and depending which audience you're speaking to will change and shape how you use the resource, as it should. So the Living with Dementia Toolkit, the fullest experience is online, as Chris said. There's just so much in there, and that really is intentional because, as Jane pointed out, everybody's so different that we knew that certain resources would appeal to somebody but not others. So if you're not interested in gardening, you're probably never going to click on the Get Gardening resource, and that's fair enough. So there's a whole plethora of things in there for different people to look at. So one way is to look at it online, but a really important thing that we did was to create these guides to hand out, and I'm wondering if I'm going to be able to do the nice noise of flipping the booklet, which I have in my hands. I have one of them. So we are down to our last few of the guide to the Living with Dementia Toolkit in English and Welsh. And what I'm going to do is give my email address so that if anybody would like to request a box of 50 guides to hand out, they can for the last time. And this has been a great method of allowing people in who maybe aren't as confident digitally or don't want to be on the internet, or even just as a reminder to help people realise, oh yes, I was interested in that and I did want to look at it. So they've been really useful. You could also incorporate the videos or resources from the toolkit into your own work, into your own website, into your own intranet, depending what your setup is. And again, we welcome that because really, you know, we've created these things and put them out there for free. We just want them to be used in whatever way is most helpful to you. Another thing is to just find the thing which interests you and share it to start a conversation, because well, actually, I don't even think it is arguably, everybody needs to be having conversations about dementia, whether it is within your family right now, within your own living situation right now or not. We can all be more understanding, we could all learn more, so why not have that conversation? For instance, after we'd made it, I sent my mum Roy the Waving Man because I knew that that would appeal to her, and so we had a chat about that. You could also print a resource PDF for somebody. So each of the individual resources has a PDF at the bottom so that you could just print out that resource. And again, the idea behind that is that if you knew somebody was particularly interested in, say, crafting, you could print the Hobbies and Dementia Craftivism PDF and share that with them to get them interested, to get them started. So just a few examples of how people have done that. There was a website that got in touch with us that wanted to use the message for carers to make carers feel less alone, to make them feel understood and that people were interested in their well-being. And that was one of the things that the Always group insisted that we create for the toolkit. So there's this 6-minute video and we all signed our names to this message because we believe it. So that's been incorporated into some people's websites. What about young people? I'm going to take that as an example because I think that's a really important one that we shouldn't overlook. If you've got young people who you want to get thinking and talking about dementia, You could go to the Involve Family and Friends page and watch the video where we spoke with year 10s and 12s about dementia, and they got to fire questions at the Always group and have them answered honestly and live. Underneath that video, there's a lovely little bit where Jane talks about some of the ways in which young people, with their incredible digital skills and knowledge of things that, quite frankly, even I've never heard of, can help with living with dementia, whether that's digitizing old photographs to make sure they're not lost, or creating a personal playlist is another lovely idea. Furthermore, we have one resource which was indeed created by a young person. A 16-year-old created Ideas for Happy Days, which is on the website. So there really is, we hope, something for everybody. Well, something new that's now available are the top tips. So one thing that we were asked for by somebody who liked the toolkit was using it, and they said, but you know what I'd really like is I'd just like a 2-pager with just the 5 top tips from each of the 5 sections of the toolkit that I could print out and give to the people I work with. So we created it. So as of today, this is downloadable from the toolkit. There are 2 versions, a colour version if you have access to a colour printer, a black and white one if you don't. So again, it's always worth sharing with us how you're using resources. We like to help where we can. And I will share in the chat once I'm no longer sharing my screen where you can find these. A couple of ideas for how to use the play. You can hold a public screening, and we've created a document to help people do that. It's a lovely way to bring people together that, you know, oh, there's a film screening. Okay, that's a reason to come along. And then you can talk about dementia. People get a chance to share their experiences. You get a chance to tell people about what's available in that area. It can be shared within post-diagnostic groups for people with dementia and or carers. But another thing we were asked for, which again we didn't initially think of, this was academics teaching on courses and also people within the NHS doing CPD, sorry, they already all have PhDs, what am I talking about? Was that they wanted the individual scenarios from the film to incorporate more easily into their teaching. So again, we created that. And we also created a screening pack so that, here's an example, if you just wanted to use the doctor's appointment scenario, which some people in the NHS have done, a chap who was leading a workshop on medical translation, which we had never come across before, was using it with his students, that you could just have an overview of what that scenario offers. And we've provided some sample questions, very open, very general, just to kickstart that discussion. And these really work. It's not just us saying it. So this was a small screening at a care home in London, which attracted people from local Age UK, local colleges, etc., etc. And again, they watched the play, had the screening pack, and then could have a discussion. Similarly, Professor Charles Musselwhite and I at Aberystwyth University could share it with people. And what's amazing is how many people there are who want and need to talk about dementia, but perhaps haven't found that forum. And finally, I'm going to leave you with the idea of the My Life questionnaire, which, I mean, without the Dear group who worked on it, without that co-production work with people with dementia, it just would have been a completely different instrument and not as good by far. So they incorporated the fact that you need somewhere to direct people to if they feel upset. We had a 3-pronged scale, so that not only the words, not only the traffic light colours, but also the happy face and the frowny face, so that people could use it. But what we'd love more people to be doing is to be incorporating it within their health and social care systems, because of course if you used this throughout a whole system and kept track of the scores, it would be easier to pick people up before they reach that crisis point, because you'd see the scores changing. So just a few ideas of how to use things. And just to launch something new, which we don't have time for me to play because I want to hear your questions, but I will. But what we do now have, which I will hopefully show you by changing the screen I'm sharing, which I now, of course, can't find. Yes, okay, right. Sorry, that was a terrible fanfare. I regret that deeply. on the Power of Music resource, this was a resource which we had created with Paul and Tommy, that's Paul Hitchmo and Tommy Dunn, BEM, of Thread CIC in Liverpool. And they wrote Brave New World, the song of our project. But what we'd always wanted to do and hadn't managed to do until now was to work with them on a video about more broadly what music means to them and how they use it in their own post-diagnostic offer in Liverpool to help other people like themselves and carers to live with dementia in a way that's more meaningful, more creative, more hopeful. And we have released this video today, and once again I will put the link in the chat, and I highly recommend it to you. So I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to open up the Q&A, and I know that we have a question already. So let me start off with the one that I can see, and then I will look more deeply at the chat now that I can see it. Okay, so question out to Ideal Team and Always Group, anyone who's still on the call, sort of what we make of this phrase, I guess, living well. How do we feel about it? What about people who can't live well? I have my own answer, but I'm going to let other people volunteer if they want to, or do you want me to kick it off? I'm looking. Okay, I'll start, and then I'll let people gather their thoughts. I think it's a really interesting question, Martin, and it's certainly something I've been thinking about a lot because I was tasked with writing the chapter about this for the book. And it's really tricky because, as you rightly point out, it's a heavily contested phrase because, you know, it depends on what that means to you. What would well mean? What does well look like? And also which other things that aren't necessarily dementia affect that, because there's so many things in life and your circumstances and relationships and other health conditions that affect the possibility of living well. And I think certainly as a team, we've moved away from using that phrase and talking instead about living with dementia, so that we acknowledge that dementia, as Keith has said, is wretched. It does make things really, really hard. But what the Always Group has always wanted us to focus on is putting living first and trying to foreground the fact that, you know, life is still to be lived, admittedly in a different way, admittedly in an adapted way. And that does cause a certain amount of heartache, a certain amount of difficulty. Nobody's trying to deny that, but that what we want to focus on is that living aspect and try and in some ways stop dementia crowding out the whole picture of existence. So that would be me, but I want to invite others. Chris, go on. Yeah.
So we deliberately didn't include the word well within the toolkit title for that specific reason, because different people feel different ways about that use of that word. I know Linda's done a very good chapter on how you can live well, and it does make sense, but it doesn't make sense for everybody. So that's why we didn't put that in the title of the toolkit.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Jane.
Yeah, I'm going to pick on what Chris was saying. I think we had long chats because I mean, I don't know if people realise, but part of what we did with as the Always Group was all of the design of the toolkit. We actually talked about, and I remember, I think it was a full meeting where we talked about the banner and the strapline, and we actually came up with the strapline of living your, I think it was living your life with hope. So it was around, you know, yeah, not everyone can live well, and there are so many reasons, and the last thing we want to do is give people guilt if they didn't feel they were living well. I mean, I work with people down here in Hampshire, and I talk about living as well as possible, because what's possible for one person is not going to be possible for another person, and it's not even the same for one person from day to day or even during the day. It can change, from 1 hour to the next. As you get tired, it's not as easy. For carers, you might have a bad night and the next day just feels so different to the previous day. But it's living as well as you can maybe at that particular time. But it's about giving people hope that, maybe they can, and something to look forward to. It is difficult.
Thank you, Jane. And Linda.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it makes me sad, really, that a term that was, the title of a dementia strategy for this country makes people feel like a failure. And I guess that when we started Ideal, this is a long time ago now, so I'm thinking 2011, 2012, when we started thinking about this project, it was with a rather critical stance on that term, so, okay, we've got this strategy talking about living well. What does this really mean? And could this be possible? And so we did start with a rather critical perspective on it. But I think, I do believe that it was, I don't know where the term originated. We've tried to find out and we haven't really tracked down its original usage. But I think, I do believe that I believe, and I don't know for sure, but I believe that the reason it started to be used was because there was a recognition that people weren't doing not doing as well as they should be, and that was partly down to how we're maybe not doing so well on the support and so forth. And I think the aim was well intentioned, to try to highlight the fact that things could be improved. And I come from a sort of rehabilitation background, really, and I do firmly believe that that there's always worth looking to see what could be improved for somebody, whatever the challenges are that they're facing. And so I sort of think when we do use it, it's in that sort of more aspirational way. It doesn't mean we're expecting everybody to have a perfect, wonderful time, and but that we could see what we can do to make things, even if it's a little bit better. And both what people themselves can do and also what supporters can do. So I think that's the sense we approached it in, but we have tended to move away from it, as Kathy said. And I wondered, though, I mean, if I could throw a question back, in research, we talk about things like quality of life or well-being or satisfaction with life. And these are all terms that the questionnaires we used adopted. So I just wonder what would people, what terms should we be thinking about if we're not talking about living well? How could we talk about this aspiration to make things a bit better, or as good as they could be, or enable people to flourish as much as they can, or to do as well as is possible? So I guess, yeah, maybe there is a need for new terminology, but perhaps we need to have a think about what it is.
Keith, did you want to respond?
I'd like to respond with total agreement. Yes, I think the label "living with" is the appropriate label, because so often people, when they're diagnosed, feel that's the beginning of the dying with. And really, I think the message that one should convey to them is it is possible to live with dementia.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you to you both, because it's a really important issue. And I think one of the things that Ideal has done that's so important is to raise the profile by giving the evidence and the enormous number of people who've been involved in the study to say, look how dramatically influential your psychological well-being is to how you live with dementia. Because what we're trying to do with that is to say, nobody can ignore this. So it's incumbent on anybody working in services, anybody who cares about a person with dementia or a carer, to try and look out for their mental health, for their psychological well-being, because we can see how much of an impact that has. So I think we're hopeful that also Ideal's evidence might prove to be further hopeful. Absolutely, and I think the question of language is something that we could talk about for days and quite possibly still not resolve. I mean, so I can see in the chat another one which is rather lovely, enabler rather than carer, really nice. But then, as Chris has pointed out, the word journey is also one that a lot of people dislike, because of the kind of where it inevitably leads. And certainly I know that with the Always group, we talked about the possibility of the opera originally being called The Journey, and we got rid of that because it's fraught with difficulty. But I think we have moved in such a positive direction with language. We're not there yet, and possibly it's difficult to get it perfect for everybody, but at least we are trying to be more enabling and more sensitive. I wish I could stay on with you and chat to you all day, but I must release you back to your day and quite possibly a lovely lunch that might be awaiting you somewhere. So all I can say is thank you so much to all of our speakers, especially the Always group. And Chris, I'm going to ask you to teach me how to make my background Christmassy. And thank you to our audience for coming to learn and to share, because we really do want to share our work with you and for it to reach these so important people who deserve more, and as you say, for people to be able to live better lives, whatever that means to them and whatever is possible. I will wish you all a wonderful rest of Wednesday, and again, thank you so much for coming. Take care.